Captain Elijah Brooks, a disciplined and courageous black Army officer, faces public humiliation from General Richard Harlow, a proud and biased superior. Despite the insult, Elijah maintains his dignity, earning quiet respect from peers and subordinates. When a violent storm strikes Fort Hensley during Military Family Day, chaos erupts, and Harlow's young, disabled daughter is caught in danger. As tensions rise, Elijah navigates peril, leadership challenges, and personal restraint, all while exposing hidden cracks in authority and prejudice. Through bravery, integrity, and quiet strength, he reshapes relationships, challenges long-held biases, and proves that true honor comes from character, not rank. The sun beat down on Fort Hensley's parade ground, where rows of soldiers stood motionless, their boots biting into the dust. The air was thick with discipline and judgment. Captain Elijah Brooks stood at the front of Alpha Company, his posture unshakable, his uniform immaculate, the bronze of his skin gleaming under the harsh light. His men respected him. They knew his calm wasn't weakness, it was control. Every command he gave was sharp, efficient, unquestioned. But today, the air felt different. Something ugly simmered beneath the surface. General Richard Harlow stepped forward, his medals glinting like mirrors to his ego. His eyes were cold, sharp enough to slice through pride. "Captain Brooks," Harlow barked, his voice booming across the yard, "I said formation at 0600, not a minute later. Care to explain why your men were a fraction late?" Elijah's jaw tensed. "Sir, Alpha Company was delayed by—" "I don't want excuses," Harlow cut in, pacing before him like a predator measuring its prey. "I want competence." He stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing. "But maybe that's asking too much." The soldiers stood frozen. Even the wind seemed to pause. Elijah felt the sting in those words, the unspoken venom behind them. He had heard it before, in looks, in whispers, in jokes told behind closed doors. But never had it been thrown so brazenly, so publicly. "Permission to speak, sir," Elijah said quietly, his voice steady. Harlow smirked. "By all means, enlighten us." "Sir, my men performed as ordered. We ran the full drill, every step logged and timed. We were delayed 30 seconds due to a malfunctioning transport. I take full responsibility." Harlow crossed his arms. 30 seconds, he repeated mockingly. "I see. And you expect the enemy to wait politely while your transport gets fixed?" A few soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Lieutenant Sam Carter clenched his fists at the edge of formation, biting back a retort. Elijah didn't move. His eyes met the general's, respectful but unyielding. "No, sir," he said evenly. "I expect my men to overcome any situation." And they did. That should have been the end of it. But Harlow's pride was fragile, and Elijah's calm infuriated him. The general took a slow step forward until he was inches away. "You think discipline is enough, Captain? You think a few medals make you equal to those who built this institution?" His tone dropped, low, venomous. "You people always want respect handed to you. Earn it." A ripple of discomfort ran through the formation. Sam's jaw dropped open. Major Sophia Lane, standing near the reviewing tent, stiffened visibly. Elijah's face didn't flinch. His chest rose and fell slowly. "Permission to dismiss the men, sir," he said, voice clipped, formal and cold. Harlow stared at him, searching for anger, but found none. Only dignity. That made him hate Elijah even more. "Dismissed," the general muttered, waving his hand dismissively. "Maybe next time you'll remember who's in charge here." Elijah saluted crisply, then turned to his men. "Alpha Company, fall out." The soldiers broke formation, the weight of silence heavy between them. Sam jogged up to Elijah, his face burning. "Elijah, what the hell was that? He humiliated you in front of the entire base." "I know," Elijah said quietly, unbuttoning his gloves. "And if I'd reacted, it would have been worse." Sam shook his head. "You can't keep swallowing it. You're one of the best officers here. Everyone knows it. He's threatened by you." Elijah looked out over the training field, the dust, the flags, the distant echo of drills. "Let him be threatened," he said. "The uniform doesn't change who people really are. But it does change how I respond." Sophia Lane approached then, her voice low but urgent. "Captain Brooks. Major Lane. You handled that better than most would. But this," she hesitated, glancing around, "this isn't going unnoticed. Some of the younger officers are starting to talk." Elijah smiled faintly. "Then let them. Maybe they'll learn something about composure." But later, when the sun dipped behind the barracks and the parade ground emptied, Elijah sat alone in his quarters. He removed his cap, setting it gently on the table, and looked at the framed photo of his late father, a man who had worn the same uniform decades earlier, at a time when black soldiers weren't even allowed to stand in front lines. "You said dignity is our loudest weapon," Elijah whispered. "But it's getting harder to hold." His phone buzzed, a message from Lieutenant Carter. "You good?" Elijah typed back, "Always." But his thumb lingered over the word. The next morning, Fort Hensley was alive with noise. Families of officers arrived for the annual Military Family Day, a rare event when soldiers could bring their loved ones to tour the grounds. Children ran between tents, laughter mixing with the blare of marching bands. General Harlow stood at the main stage, greeting dignitaries, a rare smile softening his face. At his side sat a wheelchair, and in it, little Emily Harlow. 10 years old, bright blue eyes, golden hair tied in a braid, a smile that melted formality. She waved shyly at the soldiers passing by, her small hand clutching a stuffed bear in army fatigues. Elijah, walking with Sam, noticed her. His chest tightened slightly. For all her father's arrogance, the girl radiated warmth. "That's the general's kid," Sam muttered. "Didn't know she was, disabled." Elijah finished gently. "Yeah. Car accident 2 years ago. I read her case file once. She used to walk." Sam frowned. Hard to imagine Harlow being anyone's father. Elijah didn't answer. He just watched the girl smile, laughing at a soldier's salute. Moments later, Harlow's voice cut through the chatter. "Captain Brooks." The crowd turned. Harlow strode over, his daughter watching curiously. Elijah saluted. "Sir, I want Alpha Company to handle the demonstration drill for the families this afternoon," Harlow ordered. "Don't embarrass us again." "Yes, sir." The word stung, but Elijah's tone was calm. As Harlow turned away, Emily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, he's nice," she said softly. "He smiled at me." Harlow's jaw tightened. "He's a soldier, Emily. Not your friend." But the girl's eyes followed Elijah as he walked away. Something about him felt different, kind, unguarded, and strong in a way her father wasn't. The afternoon sun would soon give way to a storm that no one saw coming. And when it hit, rank, race, and pride would all crumble in the mud. Dark clouds began to crawl across the sky by mid-afternoon, spreading over Fort Hensley like bruises. The annual Military Family Day, which had started with laughter and music, now carried an uneasy air. The scent of rain hung thick. Captain Elijah Brooks stood at the edge of the field, watching the horizon shift. His soldiers were preparing for their demonstration, a tactical rescue simulation designed to impress visiting families. "Storm's coming fast," said Lieutenant Sam Carter, tightening his vest. "Command should call this off." "They won't," Elijah replied, eyes still on the clouds. "The general wants a perfect show." Sam scowled. "Of course he does." From across the grounds, General Harlow barked orders to the staff, making last-minute adjustments to the parade route. His daughter Emily, sitting in her wheelchair beneath a canopy, watched the soldiers excitedly. She loved the precision, the sound of boots striking the earth in rhythm. Elijah took a deep breath. "Let's just get this done," he murmured. When the demonstration began, it was flawless. Alpha Company moved in synchrony, climbing ropes, securing mock hostages, performing tactical rescues with machine-like precision. Applause broke out among the crowd. Even Harlow looked grudgingly satisfied. But the first rumble of thunder rolled through the air just as the soldiers were finishing their final maneuver. A gust of wind tore through the tents, scattering paper programs and startling children. "All right, that's it," Harlow shouted. "Move the families to the recreation hall. Everyone off the field." Elijah's men began guiding civilians towards safety. The rain started as a drizzle, then thickened into a downpour within minutes. The sky turned an eerie shade of green-gray as thunder cracked overhead. "Captain!" Sam yelled over the noise. "North embankment's flooding. We need to move the vehicles before they sink." Elijah nodded. "Go. I'll check the eastern side." He sprinted across the slippery field, boots sinking in mud, rain hammering down on his shoulders. Lightning flashed, illuminating the tents that flapped like wounded birds. He helped a few soldiers tie down equipment before turning toward the family area, and froze. Emily Harlow's wheelchair was empty. Panic stabbed through him. He scanned the chaos, soldiers running, people shouting, the storm roaring louder by the second. Then he saw her, at the edge of the embankment, barely 50 yards away. The rain had turned the slope into a stream of mud, and she was trying to reach a small teddy bear that had fallen from her lap. "Emily!" Elijah shouted, sprinting toward her. Her head snapped up, startled, scared. She reached again for the bear, and her hand slipped. The wheelchair lurched forward. "Elijah, no!" Sam yelled from behind, but it was too late. Elijah dove into the mud, grabbing the handles of the chair just as it tipped. The rain-soaked ground gave way beneath them, and both tumbled down the embankment, swallowed by the brown torrent. The world turned to chaos. Mud, water, the metallic taste of rain in his mouth. He hit the ground hard but kept his grip on the chair, shielding Emily's body with his own as they slid to a halt at the base of the slope. The girl coughed, eyes wide with terror. "Mister, I can't move." "You're okay," Elijah said, his voice rough but calm. "You're going to be okay, Emily. I've got you." Above them, voices screamed. Sam's figure appeared at the top, silhouetted against flashes of lightning. "Brooks! The ground's collapsing!" Elijah looked up. The slope was beginning to crumble. The mudslide wasn't stopping. It was expanding, devouring everything in its path. "Move back!" someone shouted from above. "It's giving way." Elijah turned to Emily. "We have to get you out of here." She was trembling, soaked and shivering, her small hands clutching the bear. "I lost it," she whimpered. "You didn't lose anything," Elijah said, forcing a smile. "You're holding it now." He hoisted her into his arms, cradling her tightly as he fought through the mud. Every step was a battle. His boots sank deep, the weight of her body and the storm pressing him down. Then he heard a roar, the earth shifting again. A second wave of mud surged down, carrying debris, broken branches, and torn fencing. He dove behind a half-buried log, curling around Emily as the waves slammed into them. Mud splattered across his face. He gasped for breath, his muscles burning. "Captain Brooks!" a voice bellowed from above. "General Harlow." The man stood at the top of the slope, rain soaking his uniform, his face pale with horror. He could barely see through the storm, but when he did, his world shattered. "Emily!" he screamed. "My daughter!" Elijah looked up, shielding the child. "Stay there, sir. The ground's unstable." Harlow ignored him, trying to climb down, slipping and sliding. Sam grabbed his arm. "Sir, you'll get yourself killed. Let me go. That's my daughter." Elijah turned his focus back to Emily, her small fingers gripping his collar. "You're so brave," he whispered. "But I need you to hold on, okay? Don't let go." She nodded weakly. "Are we gonna die?" He met her eyes, the same blue eyes as her father's, and said softly, "Not today." With a deep breath, he began climbing the collapsing slope, 1 foot at a time, each movement a test of endurance. Mud pulled him down. Rain blinded him. But he kept going, Emily's weight pressed against his chest like the weight of all the dignity he'd ever carried. When his foot slipped, his knee hit rock. Pain flared. He ignored it. He dug his fingers into the earth, dragging both of them upward, inch by inch. "Almost there," he grunted. At the top, Sam and a few soldiers formed a chain, reaching down. "Grab my hand, Brooks," Sam shouted. Elijah thrust Emily upward. Sam caught her, pulling her to safety. She collapsed into her father's arms, crying. "Elijah!" Sam yelled. "Take my hand." Elijah reached, but the ground beneath him cracked. The mudslide pulled him down again, swallowing his legs. For a terrifying moment, he disappeared. "Brooks!" Harlow screamed. Then, through the chaos, a muddy hand shot up. Sam grabbed it with both arms, straining, pulling, gritting his teeth. Another soldier joined in, then another, until Elijah was yanked free, collapsing onto the solid ground, gasping. Emily broke free from her father's hold, crawling toward Elijah. "You saved me," she sobbed. Elijah forced a smile through the pain. "Just doing my duty, ma'am." General Harlow knelt beside them, trembling. The rain washed streaks of mud down his face, his voice cracking. You saved her. You saved my baby." Elijah sat up slowly. "She's safe now. That's all that matters." For a long moment, Harlow could only stare at the man he'd humiliated, now covered in filth and blood, holding the one person he loved most. Lightning cracked again. The storm was still raging, but inside the general, something had begun to break apart, something far older and darker than the storm itself. The storm finally broke at dawn. By the time the sun rose over Fort Hensley, the once green parade ground had turned into a swamp of brown water and wreckage. Torn tents hung like rags from metal poles. Vehicles lay half-buried in the mud. Soldiers moved in silence, their uniforms soaked and faces pale, tending to the damage. Captain Elijah Brooks sat on the steps outside the infirmary, a clean bandage wrapped around his arm. His uniform, though washed, still bore the stains of last night, a reminder of how close it had come. Inside, Emily Harlow slept under a warm blanket. The doctors said she would be fine, a few bruises, a mild shock, but nothing permanent. Elijah exhaled, the tension in his shoulders slowly fading. The sound of boots crunching behind him made him glance up. It was General Richard Harlow. The man looked older today, as if the storm had stripped away his authority. His uniform was immaculate again, but his eyes were hollow, lost. "Captain," he said quietly. Elijah stood, automatically straightening. "Sir." Harlow's voice was strained. "They told me you refused to rest." "Had to make sure the others were accounted for," Elijah replied. The general nodded absently, then lowered his voice. "My daughter, she keeps asking for you." Elijah hesitated. "Sir, I didn't." "I'm not here for formalities," Harlow interrupted, rubbing his temples. "I'm here because I owe you more than I can ever repay." Elijah said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than words. The general's jaw clenched. "Yesterday, I said things, unacceptable things. I was wrong." For the first time since Elijah had known him, Harlow's tone cracked with humility. "I misjudged you," he continued. "Not just as a soldier, but as a man. You risked your life for my child when I wouldn't have blamed you for walking away." Elijah's eyes softened, but his reply was measured. "Sir, I didn't do it for you. I did it because she needed help." The simplicity of those words hit Harlow harder than any rebuke could. He nodded slowly, his throat tight. Inside, Emily stirred. When she saw Elijah through the window, her face brightened. "Daddy, that's him." Harlow turned, then gestured for Elijah to follow. The girl's room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet grass. She sat upright, clutching the same muddy teddy bear from yesterday. "Elijah," she said happily. "You came back." He smiled faintly. "Had to make sure my partner was okay." She giggled. "Daddy said you saved me. Did you really carry me all the way up?" "Something like that," Elijah replied, crouching beside her bed. "You helped too. You held on." Emily beamed, then looked at her father. "Daddy, you should give him a medal." The room fell quiet. Harlow blinked, visibly caught off guard. Elijah rose slowly. "I appreciate the thought, ma'am," he said gently to Emily, "but I already have my reward." "What's that?" she asked. "Seeing you smile," he said. The girl grinned. Harlow looked away, blinking rapidly. When Elijah turned to leave, the general stopped him. "Captain Brooks." Elijah faced him. "I'd like to speak with you privately." "My office. 0900 hours." "Yes, sir." At exactly 9, Elijah knocked on the general's door. "Enter," came the gruff voice. The office, once a shrine to military order, now felt strangely human. Papers were scattered across the desk, A coffee mug sat half empty, and a photo of Emily had been placed in the center, as if she were the only thing holding the man together. Harlow gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." Elijah complied. The general took a long breath. "I've served this army for 33 years. I've commanded in war zones, seen men die in my arms, watched others betray their oaths. But I can't remember ever being as ashamed as I am today." He looked down at his hands. "You were right yesterday, about dignity. I mocked you for your restraint, and yet, when the time came to act, it was you who saved my child. Not me. Not the rank on my shoulder. You." Elijah met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Sir, every soldier takes the same oath. To serve, regardless of who needs help." Harlow gave a bitter laugh. "And yet, some of us break that oath without even realizing it." He stood, pacing slowly toward the window. "You know, my father was an officer too. Fought in Vietnam. He used to tell me the world worked in ranks. Certain people led, others followed. He believed some men didn't belong in command because of where they came from or the color of their skin." He turned back. "And I believed him." Elijah didn't respond immediately. He had heard variations of that story his whole life. But something about the vulnerability in Harlow's eyes stopped him from hardening. "Sir," he said finally, "we all inherit ideas. But what we pass on, that's our choice." Harlow exhaled shakily, sinking back into his chair. "You're right. God help me, you're right." Silence filled the room, heavy, raw, and cleansing. Then the general straightened. "I'll be submitting a report recommending you for the Distinguished Service Cross." "You've earned it." Elijah blinked. "Sir, I didn't." "I know what you'll say," Harlow interrupted. "You didn't do it for recognition. But this isn't about what you did. It's about what you represent. My daughter nearly died because of my arrogance. You saved her because of your humanity. That's what this uniform should stand for." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Elijah rose, saluted sharply. "Permission to be dismissed, sir." Harlow returned the salute, crisp, respectful, and heavy with meaning. As Elijah left, he heard the faintest whisper from behind him. "Thank you, Captain. And I'm sorry." He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. That evening, Elijah sat outside the barracks, watching the sunset burn through the last remnants of the storm. The sky was streaked with gold and crimson, as if the world itself was healing. Sam approached, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "Heard you had quite the talk with the general." Elijah smirked. "Something like that." Sam handed him a mug. "Word's spreading fast. People are saying Harlow's changing, that he ordered integrated housing for all recruits next cycle." Elijah raised a brow. "That's so." "Yeah. Guess you shook something loose in that old man's heart." Elijah looked out across the horizon, quiet for a long moment. "Maybe it wasn't me," he said softly. "Maybe it was his daughter." Sam chuckled. "That little girl's got more sense than half the officers here." The 2 men sat in silence, watching the sun dip lower. But far away, in the general's quarters, Harlow sat beside Emily's bed, holding her hand as she slept. Her teddy bear rested on the nightstand, cleaned and dry. He whispered into the quiet room, voice breaking. "You were right, sweetheart. He is nice. Nicer than I ever was." A single tear traced down his cheek. Outside, the wind carried a faint hum, the sound of soldiers marching in the distance, the echo of unity rising from the mud. The following week brought calm skies and an unusual quiet to Fort Hensley. The mud had dried, the drills had resumed, and the storm that had nearly taken lives now seemed like a distant memory. Yet, under the surface, the base was changing, quietly but undeniably. Captain Elijah Brooks felt it every time he walked through the compound. Soldiers saluted him with new respect. Conversations that once died when he entered now carried on, naturally. It wasn't dramatic, just subtle shifts that said more than words ever could. And though no one spoke it aloud, everyone knew why. Elijah had saved the general's daughter. But not everyone was pleased. In the officers' mess, whispers stirred like smoke. Some old guard lieutenants muttered that the captain got lucky, or that the general's just playing politics. But others, the younger ones, began quoting Elijah's leadership as the model for discipline under pressure. It was during one of these hushed lunches that Major Sophia Lane found him sitting alone, staring absently out the window. "You've become a legend," she said with a smile, sitting across from him. "Legends are overrated," Elijah replied dryly. "Still," she said, lowering her voice, "you've done something extraordinary. Harlow's been different. He's approachable, even kind. It's unsettling." Elijah smirked faintly. "Maybe guilt's a good teacher." Sophia hesitated, then leaned in. "You know he's been digging into your service record, right?" Elijah looked up sharply. "My record? Officially, it's for the award recommendation. Unofficially, I think he's looking for something else." "What would he be looking for?" Elijah asked. She sighed. "Regret, maybe. Or redemption. Men like Harlow don't change easily, unless they're chasing ghosts." Elijah frowned. "Ghosts?" Sophia nodded. "You should know this. Harlow's career isn't spotless. There's something buried in his past, something from Afghanistan, 2009. Rumor says it involved a black soldier, one who didn't make it home." Elijah froze. A faint chill slid down his spine. "You're saying—" "I'm saying be careful," Sophia warned. "Some debts don't stay buried." That night, the general summoned Elijah again, this time not to his office, but to his private quarters. The tone of the summons was unusual, confidential, personal. Elijah arrived at precisely 2100 hours. The room was dimly lit, filled with the faint scent of cigar smoke and old leather. On the table lay a weathered box, military-issued, marked with a faded tag, A. Brooks, 2009. Elijah froze. That was his father's name. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harlow sat opposite him, eyes weary. "Your father, Sergeant Alan Brooks, served under my command 15 years ago in Kandahar. He was one of the finest men I ever led." Elijah's throat tightened. "You knew my father?" The general nodded. "Yes. And I failed him." The words hit Elijah like a punch. He sat back slowly, unsure what to say. Harlow continued, his voice low. "It was a reconnaissance mission. Routine, or so we thought. We were ambushed, pinned down by heavy fire. Your father volunteered to draw the enemy's attention so the rest of us could retreat. I gave the order." Elijah's jaw clenched. "He never came back." "No," Harlow said softly. "And the worst part? I lied in my report. I said he died instantly, but he didn't. He was still alive when we pulled back. I made a decision to save my men. But I've carried that weight every day since." Silence fell. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Elijah stared at the box, his pulse pounding. "Why are you telling me this now?" Harlow leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Because when I saw you that day, standing in formation, proud and dignified, I saw your father. The same look in his eyes. The same patience, the same quiet strength. And it terrified me." He swallowed hard. "I insulted you because I couldn't face what I'd done to him. Every word I said to you was meant for myself." Elijah's hands tightened into fists. He stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. "All this time, you looked me in the eye and said I wasn't fit to lead, when the man who was fit to lead died because of your command." "I know," Harlow whispered. "And nothing I can do will make it right." Elijah turned, fury and sorrow colliding in his chest. "You let my family believe he died a hero, when in truth, you left him to die." Harlow nodded, his eyes glistening. "He was a hero. But I wasn't." Elijah's voice broke. "You should have told me." "I wanted to," Harlow said. "But I couldn't face his son, not when I became everything he stood against." For a long time, neither man spoke. The silence was thick, suffocating. Finally, Elijah approached the table, staring down at the old metal box. He ran his fingers across the faded nameplate. "This belonged to him?" "Yes. We recovered it after the ambush. Letters, photos, his dog tags. I've kept it all these years." I was waiting for the courage to return it. Elijah opened the box slowly. Inside lay a few folded letters, a black-and-white photo of his parents, and a rusted tag stamped with A. Brooks. He held the tag in his palm, tears welling in his eyes. "You should have told me," he repeated softly. Harlow rose. "If you can't forgive me, I'll understand." "I wouldn't forgive me either." Elijah didn't look up. "Forgiveness isn't the point, sir. Truth is." The general nodded. "Then the truth is this. Your father's sacrifice saved 12 men that day, including me. And every good thing I've done since is because I've been trying to live up to him, including raising my daughter better than I was raised." He hesitated, then added quietly, "She reminds me of him too. Brave. Pure. And you," he swallowed hard, "you saved her. The son saved the daughter. Maybe that's fate's way of closing a wound." Elijah's eyes lifted, wet and conflicted. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's a reminder that some wounds shouldn't close too easily." He turned and left the room without another word. Outside, the night was still. The base lights flickered across puddles, the echoes of drills long gone. Elijah walked alone across the courtyard, the weight of the metal tag warm against his palm. He stopped by the flagpole, the same spot where the general had humiliated him days earlier. He looked up at the flag swaying in the moonlight. "You died saving him," he murmured, speaking to his father. "And now I'm saving his soul." Sam found him there a few minutes later. "You okay, brother?" Elijah nodded faintly. "I just found out why the general hates mirrors." Sam frowned. "What do you mean?" "He can't stand seeing what he could have been," Elijah said quietly. "A better man." Sam studied his friend, then patted his shoulder. "You've done more than any medal could honor, Eli. You changed him. That's a bigger victory than any war." Elijah didn't answer. He just looked down at the dog tag in his hand and whispered, "We'll see." The night wind carried the faint sound of the flag's fabric snapping, like a salute to a man long gone, and another just beginning to rise. 2 weeks later, Fort Hensley looked nothing like it had before. The drills still echoed across the compound, the soldiers still marched in perfect rhythm, but something deeper had shifted, the tone, the spirit, the quiet sense of respect that flowed through the air. Captain Elijah Brooks stood in front of the reviewing stand, dressed in full uniform. His medals gleamed against his chest, though his expression remained composed, almost humble. Before him, rows of soldiers stood in attention, the entire battalion gathered for what had been announced as a special commendation ceremony. At the podium stood General Marcus Harlow, his posture erect, his tone grave but steady. "3 weeks ago," he began, his voice carrying over the parade ground, "a violent storm hit this base. Amid chaos and danger, one officer risked his life to save not just a fellow soldier, but a civilian child." He paused, eyes scanning the formation before finding Elijah's. "That child," Harlow continued, voice thickening slightly, "was my daughter." A faint murmur rippled through the ranks. The general took a slow breath, steadying himself. Captain Elijah Brooks didn't hesitate. He didn't consider rank or recognition. He didn't act out of obligation. He acted because it was the right thing to do. He paused again, visibly emotional. "And today, it is my honor to present him with the Army Medal of Valor." Applause thundered across the field as Elijah stepped forward. Harlow pinned the medal onto his chest, his hands trembling slightly. Cameras clicked, and for a moment everything froze, the two men standing side by side, the once arrogant general and the soldier he had belittled. Harlow's voice softened. "Captain Brooks," he said quietly enough that only Elijah could hear, "I once told you that honor can't be worn, it must be earned. You've proven me right, in ways I'll never forget." Elijah nodded respectfully, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, sir." But before Harlow could step back, Elijah took a half-step forward and raised the microphone. The crowd quieted. "I appreciate this honor," Elijah began. His tone was calm, deliberate. "But I'd like to say something, not as an officer, but as a son." The crowd stilled. Even the wind seemed to hush. He looked directly at Harlow, then out to the men and women before him. "My father, Sergeant Allen Brooks, served this country 15 years ago. He taught me that leadership isn't about stripes or stars. It's about courage, humility, and doing what's right even when no one's watching. He took a breath. He gave his life so that others could live. And he never got the recognition he deserved. So today, if I stand here as a hero, it's only because I'm standing on his shoulders. The silence was heavy, reverent. Then, slowly, the general turned toward Elijah, his eyes wet. He stepped forward again and, without hesitation, unclipped his own Distinguished Service Cross, the medal he had worn for over a decade, and held it out. "Your father," he said, voice cracking, "earned this long before I did." A collective gasp spread through the crowd. Harlow placed the medal in Elijah's hands and saluted him, a full, formal salute, held with precision and trembling pride. Elijah stood stunned for a moment, then returned the salute, his throat too tight for words. The soldiers erupted into applause. But it wasn't just noise, it was catharsis. Years of silent injustice, of unspoken bias, seemed to dissolve in that single, breathtaking moment. Later that afternoon, after the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Elijah found himself walking toward the base cemetery on the far hill. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in bands of gold and crimson. He stopped before a modest headstone, Sergeant Allen Brooks, Courage Never Dies. He knelt, placing the two medals, his own and the general's, side by side on the grave. "You got your honor, Dad," he whispered. "Not from the army, from the truth." A soft crunch of boots behind him broke the quiet. It was Harlow. He looked older now, the lines on his face deeper, but his eyes carried a humility Elijah had never seen before. "I thought I'd find you here," the general said softly. Elijah stood, brushing the dirt from his knees. "Wasn't hard to guess." Harlow looked down at the grave. "I've lived a long life, Captain. Commanded thousands of men. But I've never stood before one I respected more than your father, or his son." Elijah nodded. He'd have liked to hear that. The general exhaled slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This was one of his letters. "I read it back then, before the mission. I shouldn't have kept it, but I did. I think it's time you had it." Elijah took it carefully. The paper was old, yellowed, but the handwriting was unmistakably his father's, strong and deliberate. He opened it. "If something happens to me, tell my boy this. Don't ever let another man's hate make you forget your worth. The world may test your color, your courage, or your name. But it can never take your character." Elijah folded the letter slowly, his hands shaking. "He wrote this before he died." "Yes," Harlow said. "And I think he wrote it for both of us." For a long time, neither man spoke. The setting sun bathed the field in orange light, and the wind carried the faint rhythm of distant drills. Finally, Harlow said, "I'm retiring after next month. Thought I'd end my career teaching young officers about leadership. Real leadership." Elijah raised a brow. "You think they'll listen to you?" The general smiled faintly. "Only if I tell them about the man who taught me what it means." Elijah looked back at the grave, then at the general. "If you do, make sure you tell them this. Leadership starts when pride ends." Harlow nodded slowly. "You're right." He extended his hand. This time, it wasn't a superior offering a handshake. It was one man to another, equal in spirit. Elijah shook it firmly. "Thank you," the general said, voice thick with emotion, "for saving my daughter. For saving my conscience." Elijah gave a faint, weary smile. "Guess we both pulled someone out of the mud." Harlow chuckled softly, eyes glistening. "Yeah, I suppose we did." The two men stood there for a moment, side by side, the fading sunlight catching the medals on the grave, gleaming like twin echoes of redemption. As the last light of day sank beyond the horizon, Elijah turned to leave. He paused once more, glancing back at his father's grave, the medals, and the man who had finally learned to bow to his own humanity. He whispered quietly to the wind, "We're good now, Dad." And for the first time in years, he felt free, not just as a soldier, but as a man who had finally broken the chain of silence, prejudice, and pain. He walked away with his shoulders straight, his eyes steady, and the sound of the flag rustling above the cemetery, not in mourning but in pride.